There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
BookTube, I'm Shawn, the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel, and another special video about novellas with one of my very most favorite guests, the novelist Barb Howard, joining us from Calgary. Hello, Barb.
Hey, Shawn.
Nice to see you again. And you just got back from BC. And what's the difference in the weather between Vancouver and Calgary at the moment?
Oh, well, Calgary has been warmer than Vancouver, but smoke. So I think
Yes,
that's where we're headed for the summer.
absolutely. We had smoke in Saskatchewan for several hours on Saturday, actually. Yep.
Probably from us. A gift from Alberta, maybe.
I think it was. Damn Albertans. Last year, Barb and I did a project about novellas. I will link to those videos in the show notes. In the first video, we talked about novellas as a genre, and then we presented three of our favorites. And then we went away and we read them, the ones the other person presented, and then we came back several months later and gave our thoughts and reviews on those. And that was a really fun project. So we're doing it again in 2024. A little late getting started this year for personal reasons on my end, but I'm excited to begin. So, like last year, we have each chosen three novellas, and so we're going to show them to each other, talk about them for just a few minutes, and then we're going to go away and read them, and you should all go away and read some of them or all of them too, and we'll reconvene here in maybe August to talk about the results. So, Barb, why don't you get us started with your first book?
Sure. Well, overall, the three novellas that I chose were things that I really wanted to read. Two of them I had not read before. So they were kind of on my, I really want to do this and how great that I can do this with Shawn list.
Oh, that's great, because I was going to suggest for the next year that we do that, add at least one that we want to read but haven't read, but you've already jumped the gun, which is awesome.
So now I've read them all and kept them all. I have, okay. Yeah. When in the choosing, I went and said, I'm going to look at that and see. So I'm going to go chronologically, most recent to the oldest. And my first is Gabriel García Márquez, Until August.
Is that the one that just came out?
Yes, this is the one that just came out. It's a 2024. On the cover, it says The Lost Novel. I don't think it was lost. I don't know. I think everybody knew he was working on this since he was known that he had dementia. He said many times he did not want it published. They have some of the text in here, which is interesting that he's marked up and it says final on it. Anyhow, his sons went ahead and published this. So there's lots to discuss just in that process.
Absolutely.
When an author says don't publish it, then the family does. They felt it was worthy and also that his readers would want to read it. So I'm very curious what you think about this one, Shawn, including the ending. It has to do with the woman who goes to a unnamed Caribbean island in August every year to put flowers on her mother's grave and have a brief affair with somebody new, a one-night fling, and then goes back home.
Oh, well, that's a lovely way to observe the anniversary of your parents' death.
I don't know. I think I read somewhere it was written in a brisk and frisky style.
Brisk and frisky.
Brisk and frisky, which is not usually how Márquez is described.
Very interesting. Yes, and I have definite, and kill it, half-baked thoughts about this whole thing about somebody's unpublished work that they didn't want published being published. So it'll be interesting to think about that some more as I'm reading the novella.
Yeah, as a writer, I have some strong opinions on that. So,
yeah, well, you can leave all your unpublished stuff with me, and I promise I won't publish any of it until after you die. Yeah. And so, do we know when he actually wrote it?
He'd been writing it for a long time. When did he die? Maybe 2014, so long before that. He'd been working with this editor, and I think it's a translation from Spanish, and I think he'd also worked with the translator quite a bit before. So it's not new people jumping in on his text.
Very interesting. So the first one I have in reverse chronological order is a Swiss novel in English translation. It's by a Swiss writer who wrote in Italian, and it is called Proleterka by Fleur Jaeggy. And it was translated from the Italian by Alastair McEwen. The original Swiss text was published in 2001 and the translation 2003. I read it a couple of years ago and it bowled me over. I don't know much about Fleur Jaeggy other than that she was a Swiss writer who wrote in Italian, and she must have still been alive in the early 2000s, but I don't know much about her. But this book was so fascinating because it's such a cold novella. It's such a cold story. I think she's a teenaged girl with her father going on a journey by ship somewhere in Europe or maybe even across the Atlantic. Those details haven't stuck with me, but it's a long voyage, and she and her father don't have much of a relationship, and they don't really converse in the novel except for the mundanities of shall we go down to dinner now, and otherwise they are just completely like two ships passing in the night. And the origin story is that the daughter, she was a child of divorce. She was raised by her maternal grandmother who forbade her father, the grandmother's ex-son-in-law, from really having any contact with her at all during her childhood. Her mother was had lots of mental health struggles. And so she's grown up to be this really cold, remote person. And I don't usually like fiction that's too cold. And I was beguiled by this icy story of people that just don't really connect. But the protagonist's emotions would come out in things she would project onto the furniture or onto music, but that she just couldn't really connect with other human beings. And the whole thing takes place on the ship. It's not really a plot-driven novel. There is a sexual awakening part of the story. And beyond that, just a fascinating study of remoteness in psychology and in human character. Have you heard of Fleur Jaeggy or read anything by her?
I have not, but I'm thinking I could connect with that story about unconnected people. What does the title mean, or is that a spoiler?
It's not a spoiler. It's the name of the ship, and it means proletarian daughter, I think is what it's if you translate it into, so proletariat, right? Proleterka. I think it
Yeah.
means proletarian daughter or proletarian girl. It's a Yugoslavian liner. The point of view is interesting too. I'll be interested to hear what you make of the point of view, because it's first person, but every once in a while, sometimes in the middle of a sentence, certainly in the middle of a paragraph, it slips into third person, and it completely destabilized me in a way that just made it all the more gripping to read. I might even reread it to talk about it with you in a few months.
That's great.
It's the only one so far I've read by her, but I'm eager to read more.
So we're kind of traveling the world here, maybe. My next one is Ireland.
Oh.
Have you heard of this one? Small Things
Yes,
Like
I have.
Maybe you've read it.
I have, but that's okay if I've read it. It's no problem if I've read it. I didn't want us each to be presenting the same books today, but other than that, there's no problem at all. We're good.
I would say it's the opposite of a icy novel. It is so warm and possibly one of the best novellas I've read.
Yes, it's a strong contender for me as well.
Yeah, so it's a Booker Prize finalist, but it also won a political writing award, and I was kind of surprised. I guess now that I think about it, I get the politics. When I picked it up at my local independent bookstore, I was saying, asking people what their favorites were so I could find something brand new to me. And they said they said it's quite political, but it's not political in the way I had been thinking it would be.
No, but I can see how people would say that. Yeah.
1985 was where it's set. Written in 2022. Or maybe 2021 because it won the 2022 or was shortlisted for the 2022 Booker. Set in 1985 Ireland, which somehow surprised me. It feels like 1885, and it's set before Christmas. The main character is a man of many daughters named Furlong who delivers coal, wood. heat for people. He's a super kind individual. One of the places he delivers to is a convent, which is also known as the laundry. It does laundry, and the story flows from there. And I thought it was incredibly touching, and just it had a last page, like in the last chapter of this book I like so much. I didn't read the last chapter. I had time and I saved it for the next day. I thought, oh, I don't want this one to be over. And the last chapter is very strong.
Yeah, it's incredible. I have actually read it twice, so I probably won't reread it for this project, but I always love talking about it. My friend, the novelist Shawn gave a lecture in Calgary on that novella just about a month ago.
Oh, no way.
And I talked about this novel with her on my channel quite a lot as she was preparing the lecture. And she started out feeling pretty underwhelmed by it, and by the end, not by the end of reading it, but by the end of thinking about it and analyzing it, she thought it was absolutely stunning. And so I wish somebody had recorded that lecture, because apparently it went off very well, and she mentioned me by name during the lecture. So
oh, I wish I'd seen it. Well, and I hope I'm not boring any of your listeners or viewers by talking about it. But yeah, it kind of deserves a couple of mentions.
Absolutely, and you will not be boring anyone, because it's a book that everybody's talking about, and it's staying with most readers and want to keep talking about it. So that's a great choice.
It's a rare thing for a short book, a novella, to make it to any of the awards, in my observations. And so if it does, it's really good usually.
Absolutely.
Much as I might have issues with award culture and all of that, it does take a pretty good book to make it there.
For sure. And that is her. She writes novellas and short stories. She has never written, I'm pretty sure, a novel. She writes on that scale and does it better than just about anybody.
Moral courage. I think I fall for these ones about moral courage.
Yes. And I think Sharon Butela's critique initially was that she didn't see that there was anything else to it. But the more she thought about it, she said, no, it's much more than a morality story. There's so much history and culture and politics in it. So my next one is from Japan. Gotta read some Japanese stuff if you're gonna be my friend. This is by one of my favorite writers, the Japanese writer Yūko Tsushima, Child of Fortune. And it was published in Japanese in 1978. The translation, I think, was originally 1983, and then it was renewed in 2018. It's translated from the Japanese by Geraldine Harcourt, who sadly died around that same year, 2018. She was a masterful translator. And I read this about 4 or 5 years ago. Yūko Tsushima was herself a single mother. She's actually the daughter of another famous Japanese writer, Osamu Dazai, a very famous Japanese writer who died by suicide when she was 1 year old. She herself was a single mother, and as far as I know, all of her work, certainly all three of her works of fiction that I have read, are about single mothers, which is a perspective that you don't get really anywhere else in Japanese literature. So she's very valuable for that, writing literature about women, but particularly about single parents. Being a single parent is quite taboo in Japan, even today. And so these are so valuable for that, but they're also really beautiful character studies. Coco is the protagonist, and she is in her mid-30s, and she's a single mom and isn't really interested in parenting her daughter. So her daughter lives 3/4 of the time or something with Coco's sister, with her aunt, and is basically being raised by them. And Coco is one of those lovable misfits that Yūko Tsushima brings to life so often and so well. The term hot mess feels too judgmental. So if I could use that in a non-judgmental way, that's how I would describe her. She is divorced from her husband. She went back to her old boyfriend after she split up from her husband. And now she's sleeping with or dating her ex-husband's best friend. So that's her love life. Chaotic. And she's just kind of not sure which end is up a lot of the time, in a way that I found perfectly relatable. And I'm not confessing anything here. I'm just saying that Yūko Tsushima delves so deeply into her character that all those foibles are relatable to most readers, I think. And I just loved Child of Fortune. And all of the covers of her books in English have some kind of a photograph where it's kind of washed out by light, and that's a big part of that comes out through the imagery of her fiction. Another one of hers is Territory of Light, which came out a year after this, and that's the first one I read, and so light is in the title, but it's on all the covers, and it's in the imagery of the play of light and shadow is pretty central to her work. So I am curious to see how you get along with Coco, the protagonist, and Yūko Tsushima's fiction, because I think they're both the bee's knees.
I don't know that I've read a translation from Japanese ever.
So what have you got? This will be your last one, I think.
And I didn't give you the initials. You would have known what it was anyhow. I know you've read this. I think everybody has read this, but given what we were recently talking about in politics, oops. I went back to Animal Farm. I've had 2 people recently use it in some political dialogue and say a thing like, we don't want to be all Animal Farm, or go like Animal Farm and refer to it. And both times I thought, I don't think that's what that book said, but I read it so long ago that I reread it. And I thought it was a worthy reread. I'm wondering if you think it is still relevant. And this little copy I have, I think it might be how they originally printed it. It is the teeny tiniest little print and teeny tiny margins, sort of in a bad self-published look to the whole thing. But I think that's how it looked when it originally came out. And I think that was from a shortage of paper after World War II. And there were some interesting things in the back. You mentioned the book from published by Penguin. There's the original Penguin book. There's an advertisement at the back of the copy I have about how the dream was to have cheap books that cost the same as a pack of cigarettes. I don't know what cigarettes cost, but I did buy this, and I did think a lot about current times. And what is the book about? I know what everybody, what the interpretations are post-war, but in Alberta in 2024, I found it interesting.
Okay. I actually can't remember if I've read it. I heard so much about it. It came up in everything else I was studying, or, in the lectures my professors gave. Maybe I read it. Maybe I was supposed to read it and I didn't. It'll be well worth a reread or a first read now, this stage of my life.
I thought it would be a bit lame. I was surprised I actually cared about 1 or 2 of the animals by the end. I forgot that. I forgot a number of things about it that I think are important now.
When you read the book, did you just kind of transpose them into being people and didn't really think of them as animals as you were reading? Because that's probably what I will do, because I have a bit of an allergy to animals and that talk and are like humans in fiction. So if I just kind of forget that they're animals and read this as if they're people, I'll probably get along with it better.
You do, in a way, although, I mean, there is a little thing, with how they, do a thing, or how they hold up a flag. Every once in a while they mention, it's in there for something like that. But yeah, maybe like that. I mean, they have people names, the kind of people, or in some cases, the kind of politicians they're referring to. And I don't know how important it is that characters named Napoleon, or I'm sure important. I'm sure you don't choose that name lightly, but you could spend forever talking about historical or cross-textual references, that sort of thing. But just as a story about the animals, it had more oomph than I thought. It wasn't just here's a lesson y'all need to learn kind of book. Thank goodness.
Very interesting. I look forward to giving it a try, either for the first time or the second time. I have read 1984 at least twice, I'm sure maybe even 3 times, and that one had quite an impact on me when I read it as a young man. I don't know if I ever want to reread it again, but certainly it was a book that I very much wanted to read and reread in my youth. So
I feel like it all comes down to who you feel as a reader the sheep are, or the sheeple.
That's what it all hinges on. Okay.
Your own take on who in current times that might be. So yeah,
All
it's
right.
interesting.
Right. The Zimbabwean American novelist NoViolet Bulawayo, her 2022 novel called Glory, also, which is about the political landscape of Zimbabwe. It was inspired by Animal Farm, and I loved her debut. We Need New Names, and I bought Glory, but I've put off reading it. So maybe now that I will be reading Animal Farm, finally, maybe that will remove my hesitation to try Glory because it's kind of an intertext with that. It's not a novella though; it's a full-length novel.
One little a fun fact: Animal Farm. There was a subtitle that was removed for publishing everywhere, but in England, I think the subtitle is "A Fairy Tale." A fairy story. A fairy story is the subtitle, I think.
Have you read anything by the Canadian writer Mavis Gallant?
Oh yes, short stories.
Short story. She was the queen of the short story, and we should say a word in memory of Alice Munro, whose death was announced about an hour ago. Did you know that?
I did. I saw it on social
Yeah.
media, and that's
Yeah.
she was
She
a
was
great writer.
absolutely, and I could never decide which was better. Alice Munro's short stories or Mavis Gallant's short stories. I would go back and forth because I just think they just were masters of the short story form. To my knowledge, the only novella Mavis Gallant wrote was in a collection of short fiction with one novella, and that collection and that novella is called The Pegnitz Junction. And that collection was published in 1973. I read it in this volume, which was the collected stories. So this is, I think, pretty much every short story Mavis Gallant wrote. And I read the whole book. It took me about a year and a half. And the one novella in it is Pegnitz Junction. And I don't remember much about it. I just remember that as soon as I finished it, I thought, oh my God, that was incredible. I think I missed most of it. I think I need to reread it. So I thought, let's just slip it into this novella reading project. So from memory, I can't tell you anything about it, but I've done a little research what other people said about the novella, and it's set either right close to the end of World War II in Europe or shortly after the end of World War II in Europe, and it centers on a German woman and her lover and her small son, who I don't think the lover is the father. I'm not sure about that. We'll find out when we read it. And they are speaking in French because they don't want people on the train to know that they are German. So it kind of gives you a sense of what the climate was, political climate was at that time. And they're going on a holiday, but the train gets rerouted. And so it stops at the Pegnitz Junction, and then everybody has to figure out where they're going to go because where they're all planning to go, they can't go. Something's happened, some reason that destination is not accessible. And that's the setting. And I think most of the story happens while the train is in motion, but some of it also happens at this place where they have to get off, the Pegnitz Junction. And it's a lot about the mother of this child observing the other characters with that Mavis Gallant precision and nuance. And I'm not sure that there's a whole bunch else that happens, but it's a really spellbinding work of short fiction in the form of a novella.
I didn't even know she wrote novellas at all.
I think this might be the only one. Depending on your definition, she's got one or two 200 or so page novels, one of which is coming out, being reprinted or has been reprinted recently, sometime this year. And I thought it was particularly more than her novels or the one novel I read many years ago. I thought this was a masterpiece. So
That's terrific. Well, I love anything by her, so I feel like I'm going to like this already. I also like reading about her, the people who go, she's no Alice Munro.
I
Little,
will save it for. I just told that's a story of my encounter with Mavis Gallant. I just told it on a video I put up 2 days ago, so I won't tell it to you on camera now. I'll save it for when we get together, so enough time has gone. Yes, I had quite a encounter with Mavis Gallant many years ago.
Oh, I have to go look that up. Yeah, it's
Yes.
a little prickly where who knows? I don't know the people anyhow, but an Alice Munro just seems like the kindest person.
Yeah, I'm very curious if they ever knew each other. They must have had some kind of a contact with each other over the years, but I've never heard of any.
Yeah, my mother's reading group, they had sort of a constant headbutting of Alice Munro versus Margaret Atwood, the lovers of each, and and who wore a hat better.
Oh, well, that's a tough call, actually. Who wore a hat better? And if you asked my mom who was better, Margaret Atwood or Alice Munro, she would say, none of the above. She didn't like either one of their books.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Did you like Mavis Gallant?
Oh, I don't think I wouldn't even recommend that to my mom. Not at this stage of her life, no. Well, so I'm looking forward to reconvening. Yeah, we'll have quite a chat in a few months. So just a reminder to those watching that you are welcome to join in and read any or all of these, and we'll come back, I think, maybe around August, because we're going to need a little bit of time and see how we made out with them.
Looking forward to reading novellas.
Absolutely. Let's get busy. So everybody, thanks for watching.